Good afternoon, blog viewers. We're going to continue talking about the virtue of work that we talked about with regard to Machiavelli in one of the previous posts. Machiavelli discourses on Livy. And now work, again, is undeniably a virtue. We could hardly, live in the world without working or doing anything. We can't sit around and just stare at the wall, stare at, our garden, play Nintendo, for 80 years. So we have to do something, and that's sort of undeniable. Of course, and one reason for that is that all of us have different capacities. We have different talents, and we have talents that we've developed up to this point, and there's certainly talents that we could still develop within us. So we have both developed and undeveloped talents and capacities that we can use to work and produce things in the world. There's, of course, many things that we can know. There are many things that we can do alone and with others. We can combine our knowledge and our capabilities, our capacities with others to produce great things. We can accomplish a lot. And so all of that shows that we have the capability to create and do great things in the world through work. So therefore, it would hardly seem appropriate for us not to use those faculties, just to let them go to waste in a sense. And I think waste is an important concept to think about in terms of work, because of course the lack of work, if we have the capacity and the ability, the motivation, and we can work, it would be a waste if we didn't work in some form or another, if we didn't produce something for ourselves and for other people, if we didn't contribute in some way to our societies. That would be, in a sense, a waste of the faculties and knowledge and capabilities we all have. So, in a sense, waste is sort of the corollary to the virtue of work. And so, waste, we could say, again, is the deficit between what a man can contribute by working and developing his different faculties and perfecting them, and the deficit between that and what actually happens if man sort of doesn't develop those things and lets those capacities go to waste. So in a sense, life is always an attempt, I think, to narrow that gap, to develop more capacities, to work in better ways, to contribute in better ways. But all of that, again, comes in some way or another through some sort of work. So, again, I think we can hardly deny that work is an important virtue. But as with all the other virtues that we've talked about, I think what's most interesting and rewarding in actually studying these different virtues and trying to make sense of them is figuring out in what sense it's a virtue and what is the optimal way to practice this virtue. Because it's pretty obvious that in general, that work in general can be a virtue, is a virtue, but not every type of work is virtuous. You could imagine someone that works with other people to conspire to violate certain laws. That would not be virtuous at all. And you could think of someone that works day and night to continue to make more money for himself, and while neglecting many other responsibilities. So that would not be virtuous either. So it's not enough to just say work is a virtue, and therefore we should all work as much as we can at doing whatever. The key thing to figure out what's good in the virtue and what's good for us in practicing the virtue is to figure out what's the optimal way to practice the virtue. And so I guess the question becomes, how do we even pose that question? How do we think about the best way to practice the virtue of work? And I think one way I tried to come up with this, one crack I took at this was, what is the best way to cultivate this virtue, the virtue of work, that makes the most lasting, significant, and positive contribution to the human good, and the organic human goods, as we've talked about, the things that people instinctually regard as good, that people delight in instinctually, that almost everyone would agree is a good thing. And so what is the best way to cultivate the virtue of work in a way that makes the most bona fide, significant, and lasting, continuous contribution to human good? Now, how can another way to say it, or frame that question would be, how can I practice? How can I work in a way that I can work in a way that allows me to coordinate all the other things that are important in my life? How can I work in a way that I can continue to cultivate the many different virtues of life? How is that? How is the best way to go about doing that? Of course, it's probably never going to be. You can never optimally practice every virtue in a way that there's no conflicts. But I think a lot of the task of figuring out what's good for us is figuring out how to coordinate these different virtues and practice them in a way that we get a good blend and a good seamless coordination of the different virtues. So that's another question here is, how can I work, or how can I cultivate the virtue of work in a way that it minimizes any harms or any destruction of other virtues that are important? And of course, with work, I would submit that this is probably the virtue where it's most significant to think about how to cultivate this virtue while not destroying other virtues, because we work so often. Most people in their adult lives spend so much of their lives working and working very hard, and that takes a lot of energy, that takes a lot of effort, mental, physical, all sorts of effort. You have to train in many ways to get good at what you're doing. Sometimes that training takes place even before you enter a specific job, certain professional schools you have to go to. So work takes up so much of individual human life. So the best way, so I think that with regard to the virtue of work, it is a very significant conflict with other virtues, potential conflict. And that is significantly important to think about how to cultivate that virtue while, again, not destroying the other virtues and the cultivation of the different virtues. That to me seems so critical with work for the reasons I think I've just discussed. Now, one thinker I think that has some fantastic thoughts about work and labor and property and the relationship between all those things is John Locke in his Second Treatise of Government. And I think Locke, better than any thinker, many thinkers, gives a very complete description and account of why man works in general, how it is that he gains property through work, why that is bona fide his work and his right to property, and in the end, Locke has certain ideas that have pretty far-reaching implications if we understand his arguments correctly. So I think it'll be useful for us to look at Locke today in the context of the human good of work. And one idea that Locke starts out, like many thinkers of his in that area. Rousseau was another. He starts out thinking of the state of nature. I think Hobbes was another thinker, and he thinks about what was life like way back before civilized man and governments and institutions, when I guess you could say the Stone Age, or when men were just populating the earth. And of course, this is in many ways a thought experiment. It's hard to say that anyone has a truly historical account of what life was like back then, or more than just a glimpse of it through some history or some fragment of it. But in any event, Locke starts out by asking what was it like back in the earliest days of man, and back then. What he says is that basically nature gave man the fruits of the earth to share in common with others. That no one back then owned anything. People basically used nature and the gifts of nature in a way to satisfy their basic needs. And this was customarily done. This was done by everyone. this went on without really much of a hitch. People would just basically get up and instinctually think about what to satisfy how they would satisfy their basic needs for the day. They'd go about using the earth in whatever way was needed to satisfy those needs, and that would be pretty much it. In paragraph 27 of the second treatise, this is how Locke describes this state of affairs. He says, "The earth and all that is therein is given to men for the support and comfort of their being. And though all the fruits it naturally produces and beasts it feeds belong to mankind in common, as they are produced by the spontaneous hand of nature, and nobody has originally a private dominion exclusive of the rest of mankind in any of them, as they are thus in their natural state." So again, that in the beginning, in the state of nature, the men had they could use the earth, and it was given to them for the support and comfort of their being. Locke says that's a nice way to sort of phrase it there. And all of the fruits and the animals that were there belonged to everyone in common, but no one had the right of private dominion over any of those things. No one sort of in the beginning owned any aspect of the earth. It was all there. Nature was all there. No one had ownership, but everyone had access, I guess you could say, to it, to use it as needed to satisfy basic needs. And that's a point that Locke makes very clearly, that people didn't use more of the earth than they needed to satisfy their basic needs. Once they had sort of fed themselves, sheltered themselves, etc., they didn't need more, and they wouldn't even bother to work to get more. It wouldn't make sense because they've already taken care of their needs. It wouldn't make sense to continue. It would be sort of useless to continue to work in that environment. Now, Locke says that over time, people of necessity needed to start owning things. And he says that again in paragraph 26. He said, "Yet, being given for the use of men, there must of necessity be a means to appropriate them some way or another before they can be of any use or at all beneficial to any particular man. The fruit or venison which nourishes the wild Indian, who knows no enclosure and is still a tenant in common, must be his, and so his, a part of him, that another can no longer have any right to it, before it can do him any good for the support of his life." So there, we start out initially with everything being owned in common, but then over time, for things to be useful to individuals, people have to have some sort of secure ownership right. That he says of necessity, people need to know that, for example, if someone was to grab a mango from a tree, and bring it back to wherever he was living, he needed some security to know that someone else wouldn't come and just take that and steal it from him. And so right there we have the central problem that Locke identifies pretty quickly, that nature gives sort of the earth and all of its bounty to all men. No one owns anything in the beginning, but then over time, from necessity, Locke thinks, people need to have some sort of stable ownership right in things, or else things would be chaotic, things would be disordered, people couldn't rely on anything, people couldn't rely that the effort they put into grabbing, for example, let's say, again, the mango, would be worthwhile because someone else could just come take it. And so Locke says here, Locke thinks about it, and he says, well, he asks, on what basis can now an earth and nature that was given to all men equally and in common, on what basis can we say that someone that picked the mango now owns the mango? That's sort of the most fascinating aspect of the early part of the second treatise of government, Locke's treatise. We had everyone owning everything just in common. The earth just being given to everyone in common for their use, but no one owning anything. Man then tries to get things for his sustenance, But in the process, now we have to have some sort of stable property right created. And where are we going to create that? Where are we going to derive that conceptually? Where is that right going to be located? So Locke thinks about it and theorizes about it. And he comes up with the idea that he repeats over and over again in the first, let's say, first 50 paragraphs of the second treatise, that whatever we mix our labor with, whatever we sort of work for, use either our minds or our bodies, and we use that to in some way cultivate nature or produce something out of nature. That is ours because we own our being, we own our mental, our physical faculties, and when we make the effort to in some way, again, pick a mango from a tree, that has, once we've grabbed the mango, it's become ours because we've used our labor and our faculties, and we've mixed it with the earth in a way that something has been created for us. And he makes this argument throughout, but I think the best formulation is in paragraph 27, where he writes, though the earth and all inferior creatures be common to all men, yet every man has a property in his own person. This no body has any right to but himself. The labor of his body and the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his. It's a key sense right there. The labor of his body and the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his. Whatsoever, then, he removes out of the state that nature hath provided, and left it in, he hath mixed his labor with, and joined to it something that is his own, and thereby makes it his property. Again, the concept of mixing, man mixing his labor with something, joining to it something that is his own, that was already, but that was in nature, but man sort of bringing labor, bringing his work, his hands to nature, and all of this whole process makes whatever was previously in nature now man's property. It being by him removed from the common state nature hath placed it in, it hath by his labor something annexed to it, that excludes the common right of other men. So now we have, again, finally we have the notion of exclusion. Everything was accessible and common to everyone, but when someone mixes his labor, his work, his hands into something of nature and takes it out of nature, then there finally becomes the right of exclusion of other men. And then he finalizes this paragraph by saying, for this labor being the unquestionable property of the laborer, no man but he can have a right to what it is, what that is, once joined to, at least where there is enough and as good left in common for others. So this is sort of the notion that we get from Locke. Nothing unjust Locke sees here. Again, through that last sentence, he says, there is plenty left for others. That's a key point. It's not that by my picking the mango out of the tree, you can't go to some other tree somewhere and pick another mango. In fact, if you waited long enough, you could probably go to the same tree and another mango would be there in a while. So Locke sees nothing problematic in the fact that when we own our being and when we own our work, we mix our work with nature, and whatever we create is ours. Foundational thoughts for Locke as to the whole idea of the relationship between work and property. Now, Locke goes on to talk about before. Now, all of this happens at a time. It's sort of a key point for Locke that all of this happens before the invention of money. And so, before money is created, Locke thinks about this and pretty strongly concludes that men would only take out of the state of nature, would take only, let's again go back to the mango example because it's easy. Men would only take as many mangoes as they could use. It wouldn't make sense for someone to continue picking mangoes, thousands of mangoes for himself, because, again, this is before money is created, because the mangoes would rot, and he can't eat that many. There's only a finite number he can eat, or the finite number he can give to his family or friends. At some point, they're useless, and they'll rot. Think again. I guess think of sort of like a hot dog eating contest. You have someone eating maybe at most 20 or 30, 20 to 25 hot dogs, and he's like the champion. So there's a pretty small limit of how much an individual person really needs to take care of his basic needs. And before money, Locke concludes pretty strongly that it would just be wasteful. He uses the word waste for men to take more than they need, to stockpile. Things would rot. Things would it would be a waste of the person's labor to continue doing that, and so it just was not done. He was thought there was plenty left in that sense for everyone, because people were not taking more than they needed, and because of that, there was no envy in society. There was no jealousy in society. People were just using what they needed. They would take out of nature what they needed. They would enjoy what they needed, and their neighbor would do the same thing. I think he gives the example of a river and a stream, and he says, think about a big, big river where you see someone at the top of the river grabbing or using some of the water, taking a bath, drinking some of the water. You would, if you're at the bottom of the river in that scenario, you're not pained or you're not upset. You're not envious of the fact that he's using the water, because there's so much water that's still available for you to use. There's so much there. There's no reason, it's senseless for you to be jealous of that person, because you can continue in a river that's boundlessly, endlessly flowing through with water. Both of you can enjoy as much as you need, and there would still be a ton left for everyone else. So the notion here is of sort of a world where resources are not scarce but are sort of bountiful, and men's needs are far below what are needed to satisfy those needs. So this is again all before money is created. Now, when money is created, the situation changes. The excess mangoes. Let's go back again to the example of mangoes. If someone was to continue stockpiling mangoes, if he thought they would rot, what he would do is, if he was clever enough, he would start selling the mangoes for money. And money, unlike a mango, would not rot. It would be useful. The value of money would not decline. It would still be useful years from now, whereas a mango would rot. Or he would trade it. He would trade the mangoes for other things that wouldn't rot, for metal or for nuts. I think Locke gives the example of nuts that would at least last a year. So in this sense, Locke thinks that with the invention of money and barter, it would make sense for man to work beyond his basic needs, because money sort of solves the problem of waste that existed in the state of nature when thinking about whether someone should continue stockpiling things. In the state of nature before money, it wouldn't make sense because everything would go to waste. Now with the invention of money, it makes sense because money is not a form of waste. Money maintains its value. Same thing with gold or silver. All of these things maintain its value, and therefore someone can continue working now, can continue working and working and working without any concern as to obvious concern, I guess I would say, qualify that statement, obvious concern that whatever he was working for, whatever he was creating would go to waste. It's because money does not go to waste. So that is the sort of the key change that came about in society with the introduction of money. That is sort of Locke's account of it. Now, what are we? What to make of all of this? in a sense, I have sort of three strong reactions. I wouldn't say strong. I would say three um, significant reactions to these arguments for the virtue of work. The first is that if you accept Locke's premises on a lot of these arguments, um, the argument that comes through gives a pretty strong, you get a pretty strong argument for man to give back to his community. Um, Recall again that Locke's property argument started with the notion that people own their being, people own their rational faculties, people own their physical faculties, and when people use those faculties to produce something, they own what they produce. They own what they mix their labor with, what they mix their work with. Um, and that argument certainly makes sense in many levels. But, and Locke didn't seem to bring this out, at least in the sections I read of the second treatise. But the issue that comes about pretty quickly is that no one actually is entirely self-made. Everyone is a product of their communities, of their families, of the nations they were a part of the schools they went to when they were growing up, of the helping hands they've received from people over the years, the security that was provided by, for example, let's say a military or the police, the food that they eat through restaurants they went to, and all of these things, and the water you drink would be supplied by the city and cleaned by the city. You could continue sort of giving examples here, but the notion that anyone entirely owning or having 100% ownership in their own person doesn't hold up. On some level, of course, we all own our being, and we all own what we do. We're free to do what we want to do, but on sort of a moral basis, moral conceptual basis, everyone, in some respects, perhaps to a majority extent, is a function as a product of their community and friendships and families, and everything that sort of happened to them over the years. And if that is true, then I would think there would be some sort of strong, again, probably not, well, to some extent, we can see the justness of things like paying taxes, for example. You owe certain things to the government, or that produced you and that keeps you safe, and therefore taxes would be legitimate and justified because you are not the labor that you mix with things in nature is not entirely a result of your own faculties. It's a result of the community that sort of brought you up. Beyond that, beyond sort of some obligation to pay taxes and sort of see the wisdom of that, you would certainly also perhaps owe things to the community that you live in and the families that raised you, people that gave you a helping hand over the years, schools you went to. All of these things, these were a part of, these developed and nurtured and fashioned your intellectual capabilities, your talents. And because of that, you would have some basis to give back to those communities from whatever property that you gained. Because, again, it's not entirely you that gained that property. It was a result of all the different people and institutions that sort of cultivated you over the years. And there would be some, I would think, a strong moral argument here to give back to those, to give back to your family, to give back to your community, to give back to educational institution, to pay taxes and support the government, to engage in charity efforts, to people that are less fortunate. All of those things, to some extent, has a strong moral appeal to me, because all of those things helped you in some form or another become who you are and develop the labor and the capabilities to work and gain property through your work. So that was sort of one dominant thought I had. The second thought I had was this idea of money as something that doesn't rot, and it's making sense to work for more than what we need to amass more and more money. I'm not sure about this argument. On some level, sure. I mean, money is not a fruit. money doesn't rot like a mango. That's pretty clear. I think the creation of money did, to some extent, solve the problem of what to do when you have too much, and concerned with things rotting. That problem. But on another level, the purchasing power of money does tend to go down over time. If you look at the U.S. dollar, it's gone down for many years now. It's not at all certain that money doesn't lose value and it preserves all its value. And if that's a open question at least, then that would sort of call into question the idea that it's wise to continue to work hard and make more money because money is that thing that preserves value, because it may not. And even beyond this, the question still is there that even if money is now something that doesn't rot and preserves its value, does it still make sense to pursue it without limit? Again, how much can any person enjoy was sort of one of Locke's key concerns. What is really needed to take care of our basic needs, and even a bunch of things beyond basic needs, things that we delight in and enjoy, our hobbies, vacations, nice things that we like. How much is really needed in that respect? I think the question that comes out of reading Locke's ideas on labor and work and property is, even if money keeps its value, does it make sense to continue stockpiling it, in the same sense that it didn't make sense to stockpile mangoes at some point? Even if this thing is preserving its values, does it make sense to continue sort of hoarding it for yourself, or does it, like the mangoes, become a case where, again, you've worked too hard, you have too much, you don't need everything that you've gained. It doesn't make sense for you to continue doing that. It makes more sense for you to start enjoying whatever you have, and rather than trying to stockpile more and more. So that's, I think, a question that still remains open. I'm not sure that from Locke we get an easy answer, but it's at least certainly a question that comes out as to the relationship between money, work, and the satisfaction of needs and property. The third idea I had, or impression I had, was from this is what kind of work, what type of work are we engaged in? What does Locke's ideas have to say about that? Well, Locke finds, I think, in many respects, the virtue of work, what's instinctually he finds rewarding about it and virtuous, is the fact that men are mixing their labor with the earth and in some way improving or cultivating nature in the process. That comes out in his discourse, in his second treatise. It's not that when you pick a mango from a tree, you're not destroying the earth. You're in fact feeding yourself. The tree's going to probably regrow. And if you develop a farmland, again, you're cultivating the earth. If you're planting corn, if you're planting tomatoes, all those things, you're mixing your labor. You're creating something of value, and you're not destroying the earth in the process. And so that was sort of the account of work that Locke, I think, found virtuous. It's not at all clear, I think, from what Locke says, that he would find a lot of virtue in types of work that don't produce any organic good for anyone, that don't improve the earth, that don't harness things in a good way for people, that don't produce things of value to people. I think that leave people, mentally, psychologically, and spiritually weakened, sort of exhausted, sort of deadened, and in the process of doing all those unfavorable things to people, not producing anything of value for anyone else. I think that the account that Locke gave of work would not in that sense, be very would not sort of encourage that type of work. And I think you can think about it in terms of what is the contribution in those scenarios to nature. What can we think about when we're working? What contribution are we making to nature and to the society we're living in? That's good, or is it more that in the process we're destroying ourselves, we're destroying the society we live in, we're not making any good contribution? And sort of again the waste concept coming in, that this is not something that's promoting other virtues or the good of society, but this is somewhat of a wasteful activity. It's wasting the best years of our lives doing this activity. It's not making any organic contribution to the human good. So I would ask everyone to think about that. It's something I've thought about as well, that I think everyone should think about in terms of what it is that through work, what contribution is really being made, how is the sort of the society and the nation you live in, how is it being left better off from your work? How are the people that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis being improved through your efforts? What is the meaning you're finding in your work? What is the contribution you're making? And if there's situations in work where you find that you are just working for years and there's no contribution being made, there's no organic good contributed anywhere, you could think, for example, of a lawsuit that goes on for 8-10 years, a class action lawsuit, and you work on it. In the end, both sides work very hard. There's some small coupon settlement, $10 for someone. What is the contribution that's being made to society through all that work? Is that more of a waste of everyone's efforts in the Lockean sense of not developing society, not developing nature, not developing the earth? Is that a way to think about it? You could say, okay, well, on the other hand, you could say, no, well, if this lawsuit had not been filed, if both sides had not worked so hard on the case, then the conflict would not have been resolved, and that would have produced problems. It was good that the conflict was ultimately resolved. That was a good contribution made to society, and despite the fact that the costs involved to everyone. I've heard those arguments. I'm not sure. I'm terribly impressed with them. Does not strike me as it strikes me more as something that's made up or that's hypothesized after the fact, but doesn't really ring true to the fact of what happened. So anyway, questions to think about in terms of work, in terms of Locke's ideas of what's the virtue in work, and we'll return to a lot of these ideas, I'm sure, in the future. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.